and welcome back to the WTF Sunderland podcast for another of our pre-season episodes as we announce yet another signing. While the signing of Granit Xhaka was a huge one for the club, it's safe to say we didn't need to know too much about him and definitely didn't need any introduction. But our new loan signing, Marc Guiu, I pronounced that incorrectly 100%, is perhaps a little different. He's came from one of the top six, but we don't know a great deal about him due to his age, the fact he's only been around for a year. So to give us the lowdown on what to expect, I've roped in my really good friend, which has been a little while, Rob, and massive Chelsea fan. Rob, how are you doing? You well?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, mate. Yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. I know that I've already butchered his name. So the first question, how do I pronounce it?
It's Marc Guiu. So, interestingly, again, you're not the first person to do it. Because he is Spanish, a lot of people assume it might be something more like Gueye or something because of the part Guay in Spain. But he's actually Catalonian, and he's been quite fiercely proud of his Catalan heritage. Again, coming from La Masia, it's not to be surprised. So he's been very, very insistent, and he was insistent on his first Chelsea interview that it's Guiu. And again, after a year or so of saying it, it now feels very strange to hear it any other way, to be honest.
It's odd when, because there'll be people listening to this thinking we've signed the Crystal Palace defender. Just to confirm, we definitely haven't. It's the Chelsea forward who used to play for Barcelona. I'm just not very good at pronouncing names. But, Rob, before we get into it, I'm looking forward to the season. It's a massive one for us, but it's been a good summer for you. I know some people are not big fans of the new competition, but look, a trophy's a trophy, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to be honest, I think we're probably in competition this year, aren't we? Who can announce the most signings by the end of the window? But no, I'm really quite excited for the Premier League this year. I think a lot of sides have strengthened really well in the summer. Again, I think it's good to actually see a lot of the sides that have come up. I think Burnley have actually made some really astute signings. I think they'll find Amando Broja, who's about to join them, I think will turn out to be quite an astute bit of business. They brought some good other names as well. Sunderland, obviously, some real quality. I think Xhaka is at the beginning of the summer, if you just said to Brentford fans, you're going to end up with Jordan Henderson and Sunderland are going to end up with Granit Xhaka, I think they'd have much rather it gone the other way around. I think it's good to see that. And obviously, Leeds are now starting to try and make some business, although I think they're slightly behind on everything else. What I don't think we need this year is another season where, like last year, where, to be honest, all of the promoted sides were sort of doomed or effectively doomed by Christmas, because I don't think it's very helpful. I don't think it's good for any sort of narrative of story, but also at the same time it kind of makes things a little bit boring when you're going into no jeopardy at the end of the season. And besides the single Champions League spot on the final day, there wasn't really a lot to be decided this season by that point. So I think it would be better to have something more exciting and more competitive league.
In terms of the Premiership itself, look, we've been away from it for 8 years, hence me calling it the Premiership when it's the Premier League. But what's changed? Because I feel like I haven't watched Premier League football for literally 8 years, because when your team's not in it, you don't watch it. And unfortunately, I watch a lot of League One. I can tell you a lot of stuff about Gillingham probably from a few years ago, but what league are Sunderland going to be going into, and how much has it changed in the past, say, decade?
I would say it's probably a bit more. The pace, I think, is a little bit slower now in the Premier League in the general play, but I think the transitions are now a lot faster. There are now a lot of teams that, can just go bang, 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 a couple of quick passes, and suddenly the ball's in the back again there. I think there's an awful lot more punishment as well of teams playing out from the back. Every team is trying to, be Pep Guardiola and, being silky, but as Southampton found last year, it's hard to be Pep Guardiola when you've got Jan Bednarek at the back. It's sort of you're looking at that, and there were so many goals last year. It's one of my pet peeves in football. Again, I know it's an old man yelling at cloud here, but one of my pet peeves is the fact that people won't, play a bit more direct and play a bit more longer, and everyone tries to play it from the back nowadays. And not every team needs to do it. I think it's a bit of a sort of a bit of a curse that Pep's inflicts on all of us, is that every team thinks they can do it now, and quite frankly, it's okay to say you can't do that and play to your strengths instead. And I think more and more teams should actually consider that, especially if you don't have the goalkeeper or the defence that can, silkily pass it through the line. Obviously, we all love seeing, a situation where ball at the goalkeeper and, a string of about 20, 30 passes ends with someone tapping it in at the back post. But equally, I think, I said to someone, my favourite goal that Chelsea scored, ironically, at the Club World Cup was the first goal against PSG, which literally came from the ball back to Sanchez, one long ball into the channel where you made a sensible run and they got Gusto forward to exploit it. Again, got inside, then had the intelligence to cut it back, and simple finish. It doesn't have to be 12,000 passes. So I think it's quite a different league in that regard. But I actually, I'm quietly I've looked at some of the squads and quietly I'm sort of thinking, Sunderland, I'm thinking, if you can get the points on the board, I think especially at home, I think, the same that's going to be very, very important. But I think if you can make that a real fortress, and I know it's a cliche for a lot of Premier sides, I think you should probably be fine. I think there's a lot of, teams I'm looking at, the likes of Brentford are the one I think are really fearful this summer, who are having, just being picked clean in a lot of parts. Obviously lost the manager, lost Brian and Burma. Johan Wieser doesn't really want to stay. They haven't really got that proven sort of goal scorer in there. And I also think, so far you're looking at West Ham, their lack of business and the fact that so much is over-reliant on Jarrod Bowen. If Bowen isn't really scoring, they aren't really scoring. So, to be honest, I think, a couple more. I'm not necessarily sure Guiu will be the end of it, but I think one or two more quality additions, and actually you'll be quite well set.
I'm going to refer to him as Mark until I get used to pronouncing his name. But look, you signed Mark from Barcelona for about €6 million in the summer of 2024. This season, he's going to be spending the year on loan with us at the Stadium Light. In short, what kind of striker are we going to be getting?
So Marc Guiu is a really interesting player because he actually came on his Barcelona debut and actually did, something very few players do for Barcelona, which is come on the academy with them losing and then come on and turn a game around and actually score the winning goal for them. I think about 60 seconds into his debut. Or as they equalised 6 seconds in and then score the winner a couple of minutes later. Guiu, Barcelona were very keen on keeping the player, but he had a release clause in his contract, as all players in Spain have to do. And before he could sign a senior pro deal, Chelsea nipped in and used his Barcelona B contract effectively to sign him. Now, Guiu arrived very much as sort of the third choice striker, shall we say, behind Nicholas Jackson and Christopher Nkunku last season. However, I think he gained a lot of fans initially due to his work rate. Like, you're getting a relentless presser here. If you look at a lot of the clips of Guiu, of the best stuff he's done so far at Chelsea, it will be from him pressing, harrowing, closing down. He's got a real turn of pace that surprises goalkeepers. I mean, we saw this on his debut against Servette, and this kind of, I think, summed up Guiu at the time. Brilliant bit of pressing to take the ball away from the goalkeeper. Brilliant bit of pressing, and then took one heavy touch, panicked a little bit, and then swung a foot at and fell over with the empty net. Now, not ideal to see, but he has, after that, he did calm down. After the first goal went in, the monkey was really off the back, and he actually has a hat-trick for us already this season. He got one against Shamrock, and if you watch the hat-trick against Shamrock Rovers, it's a perfect hat-trick, and it will typify exactly the sort of player that you are getting in that two of the goals are from taking advantage. One's taking advantage of a defensive lapse and a poor bit of concentration where nicked the ball off the defender and stroked it home very, very nicely. Second one, again, long ball forward where the goalkeeper started to come, saw Guiu bearing down and got himself caught in no man's land, and Guiu finished it very nicely. And the third one, my particular favourite, was a cross towards the back post where he absolutely hurled himself at it to the point he actually he scores and also collides halfway around the post. And it was a bit of a shame, actually. Again, he's so over enthusiasm at times. He maybe needs to tone it down slightly because against West Ham in January, he did pick up a knock from basically chasing down a relentless long ball that realistically didn't need to be chased down. Chelsea were 3-1 up going into the last minute at a time, but he really wanted to try and get on the end of it and score it and injured himself. And then we missed him for a good chunk of the second half of the season. And ironically, I think if he'd have been fit, he'd have probably been the first choice striker due to Jackson's own troubles and injuries, and also the general malaise in the attack. But he's a really, really good presser. He can finish with both feet. He is someone that I think in the sort of adds something a bit different to Eliza Mayenda and also to Wilson Isidore. I think he will actually do quite well if you play him in the front too. I think he's the sort of striker that's happy to maybe work off someone and do the donkey work, put the hard legs in, put the sprinting in, and leave someone else there to do the finishing. He's by no means the finished article, though. I want to make this very, very clear. There are moments where he comes from La Masia, so he does have a good touch. You don't get to be a La Masia footballer without having a pretty decent touch. But there are times where he either, he start dribbling with it and he'll try one too many things, or alternatively, there are some times where he will just sort of get crowded out because he'll try and do one touch too many or one trick too many. He is actually, as I said, he isn't lightning quick, but he has got a very good turn of pace. I think he's the sort of player that the more football he gets and the more game time he gets, the better he's sort of become, because there's clearly assets there you can work with. And it's all really about, I think, polishing the charcoal and seeing if you get a diamond.
In terms of like the forwards you mentioned there, Mayenda and Wilson, I personally prefer both in the middle or together in a 4-4-2, but they are both capable, if we need to put maybe Mayenda on the right, Wilson can go on the left, despite the fact that I think they're both clearly better through the centre or alongside each other in a 4-4-2. With Mark, is he a straightforward central nine, or can he be a bit versatile if need be?
I mean, we haven't so far seen him being sort of more versatile per se out wide, but I could kind of, I could see it working. He's got such a relentless work rate on him. He does absolutely run his absolute socks off. If you watch some of he was Chelsea's top scorer in the Conference League
Hmm.
last season, mainly due to in the group stages, because again, after that he was injured. But you will see that he works incredibly, incredibly hard, harasses and harangues defenders. He's the sort of player in that regard. He did become a bit of a crowd favourite just for that simple reason of the fact he doesn't give you a moment's peace. And I think it was away at Heidenheim where they sort of Heidenheim started quite well and had Chelsea under pressure. And the way Chelsea actually got back into the game and sort of got composure was they took a short goal kick and instantly he was on the defender and so had to go back to the goalkeeper. And instantly he was on the goalkeeper, so he had to go out to the other defender. And instantly he was over and across to him. And he sort of drove the press and from that Heidenheim put it out of play. And it kind of woke everyone at Chelsea up. And I feel he's the sort of player he can maybe do that. He can be that sort of spark to, with his work rate and his energy, just to give you that sort of extra kick and be like, oh, hang on, guys, we're not sort of out of this and we're not sort of, completely out of it. He's just, because he works so hard, it's one of those players you kind of will to do well because he comes off the pitch and you'll look at him and thinking, yeah, you actually give it every single thing. And for me, the first priority of any player is they come off the pitch looking like they're shattered. And as long as they've done that and they look like they've actually put the efforts and the hard yard in, even if it hasn't worked, I'll be more sympathetic than if they come off and it looks like they've just strolled off the sun lounger.
It's interesting you say that because look, it's a cliche, I think sometimes, but I think it is accurate. Like sometimes I think it's a famous saying, and sometimes you'll cheer a tackle more than or as much as a goal sometimes. And I think in the northeast, the kind of area we are, especially
Mm.
myself anyway, we like a guy who like runs his bollocks off basically and shows for the badge. Is the marriage of him and the way that in general we like to see players playing hard work and bit of quality as well. We do like that as well, don't get me wrong. Is he the
Mm.
kind of player that will kind of adapt to like the pressure cooker and the goldfish bowl of a northeast just by the sheer hard work that he puts in, maybe?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, you've got to back yourself somewhat. Where if you're in Barcelona's academy and you go ahead and say they want to give you a pro contract, and you say, actually, no, I'm going elsewhere, you've
Hmm.
clearly got to have some level of confidence in yourself. And at the start of last season, he had the chance to go out on loan and turned it down to compete for a spot at Chelsea. In January, he was injured, so he couldn't go out on loan, but I don't think it was really an option. And even this season, I can tell you for a fact he's turned down loans that on paper I think would have been easier than Sunderland in the Premier League, where if we're being honest, it is going to be a battle to stay up. If we're being honest, just purely due to the fact that you are a promoted side, I do think that perhaps it'll be a battle that will actually be quite swiftly won. But I do think it's ultimately um, if you're able to sort of do that and you're able to turn down those things, you've got to have a lot. You've got to have self belief, and I get the feeling he is one of those players. Maybe a goal in something like a Carabao Cup game or something early on just to settle the nerves would do the world of good. Because once he got that first goal for Chelsea, and you looked a very much more confident player, and it's getting that monkey off the back, isn't it, with the strikers? It's always the thing. I sort of said it with Chelsea with Joao Pedro. You sort of saw it in the Club World Cup because that first strike went in. It gave him the confidence to then do what he did with the second strike, which is take on all comers and smash it into the top corner. Similar with Liam Delap in the group stages, getting that goal, albeit against some the Tunisian opposition, gave him the confidence that then when he was coming on as a substitute against Paris Saint-Germain, he was looking at Marquinhos and Donnarumma and thinking, I'm going to skin you and put it in the top corner. And I don't think you're necessarily going to get that if you don't get that. But I do feel he's the sort of striker that also, because he puts himself in the places that other strikers don't necessarily want to go in, he will get weird goals, the sort of things that, hits him in the ribs or deflects in off, the thigh or just bounces in off the head, not necessarily a header, but just because he's thrown himself in at the back post. And I think you'll quite like him in that regard because he's sort of not, he's not the traditional Spanish centre forward. Like people think of the Spanish centre forward, the likes of your Torreses and your Villas and more recently, I'm not going to put Alvaro Morata in the same category, but a more sort of cultured centre forward and somebody who's not necessarily like that. Guiu, in many ways, reminds me more of the old-fashioned English centre forward. Like he's sort of more of an English centre forward than anything.
In terms of like our coach Reggie Slibreese, obviously his background
Mm-hmm.
predominantly before he was at Lorient and now at Sunderland, where he's had success outside of that random relegation. But look, there's reasons behind that which have been covered. his history and his background is all based in youth football. Like, although I suppose essentially Sunderland fans listening to this will be thinking, well, I don't care what happens with Chelsea, which is only natural. We care about our own
Mhm.
clubs. Like, how beneficial is it going to be for him coming to Sunderland, working with a coach who's renowned for working so well with young players and has already found success with a young group of players at Sunderland in promotion last year?
It's really interesting because one of the main things that was said to me this season for Chelsea for our loans was that if they loaned out young players, they wanted them to be in a similar environment to what they had at Chelsea, which is a core of senior players, but a majority of them are younger players and players that sort of get on, and also a forward-thinking younger coach that isn't going to necessarily punish mistakes. There's been a feeling historically that at times Chelsea have loaned out younger players to sides where they've not necessarily had the sort of coach who's going to put an arm around them and say, don't worry, the next one will go in, etc. They've been at the more sort of stick end of the carrot and stick spectrum. And I think actually, I think it will do quite well for sort of Sunderland in that regard. The fact that it is a lot of younger players, the fact that it is sort of quite a young core that you've got there. There is obviously some experience, but it's generally quite a young core. I think that will make the transition easier. And I also think, with Lebris, put it this way, the other coaches that were really keen on Guiu this summer were Como made an offer through Cesc Fabregas, and they actually wanted to buy him at the end of it, which is partly why Chelsea turned it down. And also Ipswich through Kieran McKenna, who's obviously renowned for his work with young players. So Chelsea's modus operandi for all loans this summer has been make sure you get them into a club that A, plays a similar style of football, and B, also is a similar sort of mentality and ethos. Because what they didn't really want to do was send him somewhere, maybe a bit more sort of rough and ready, shall we say, where it's more direct, but also if sort of like, and this is the issue they had with Alfie Gilchrist last season, and they admit this, is that, he went on loan to Sheffield United, did well, but then Chris Wilder reverted to his tried and tested senior players. And regardless of how well or badly Gilchrist was playing, because of the sheer number of loans at the club, he wasn't going to get a shot. So I think, there's a lot of goodwill, certainly from Chelsea towards sort of the way Sunderland approached the loan. I'm told it was, although it was announced yesterday and announced in the last couple of days, it has been sort of in the offing for a little while. There have been sort of initial conversations as early as back in June about taking the player. So I do think that certainly Chelsea will have done their homework. And one thing that I will say is with the loans department nowadays, Chelsea will try and make sure that they're sending the player to the right environment. So if they think it is the right one, then there's no reason to really doubt them.
In terms of like, look, for Sunderland for like the number of years we've been seen as kind of that sleeping giant, and in a sense, I suppose we still are because look, we've just been promoted again. But we're not a League One team. We're not a. We certainly have never been a struggling Championship team necessarily outside of one season. Like from a Chelsea perspective, what is sort of the view of Sunderland these days? Because it feels like a lot of people are looking at us from the outside in and seeing players like Marc that can come in and Joe Bellingham last season come in, produce, do well. It feels like people are like what would be the word? They quite admire how we're doing things these days, but I don't know if that's quite a insular,
Mm.
almost arrogant thing. Like as a Chelsea fan, are you pleased that that's the club he shows he's come to as opposed to maybe in Ipswich?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I'll say on my view of Sunderland, I've just about now forgiven you for 2014 and stopping us winning another Premier League title. Just about moved on. Um, but I will say that I think certainly again, because I obviously have a sort of a wider sort of knowledge of this because obviously my dad is an Oxford fan, and so I've effectively watched Sunderland in the last few years going up and coming up and going through. So I think it's been. I think firstly it's impressive to see the fact that they've backed younger players and the way they've backed younger players and the fact they've acknowledged that, okay, players might not come in and they might not instantly be absolutely brilliant at this level. They might need a couple of games to adapt. They might need some time, but we're going to give them the time. And we're also going to give the manager time. I think that's the big thing as well, because there have been times in the last couple of years where Sunderland have had wobbles in form and in performance, and other coaches and other owners might have pulled the triggers. So I do think Kiri Louis Dreyfus probably deserves quite a bit of credit for sticking to the approach and sticking to the plan, because it's never easy. I think there's a lot of teams at the moment, and especially I think with the nature of the window Sunderland are having, I think there's a lot of people suddenly finally waking up and realizing, well, hang on, this must be a team that people want to come and play for, because these are not the sort of Xhaka, for example. I have no doubt that Leverkusen wanted to keep Granit Xhaka at the beginning of the window. I know for a fact they did. I have no doubt that he will have had Champions League offers from elsewhere. I know that AC Milan preferred him to Arden Deshari, who they're going to now sign. from Club Brugge. I know that he's very much the second choice because Xhaka was the first choice. So you're getting names in that other clubs wanted. And okay, I mean, it may have felt like, I think it was about roughly 8 years ago now you were in League One. I
Yeah.
mean, 8 years ago, if I'd have said to you 8 years ago that, in 8 years' time, you're going to be AC Milan to a player who's won the Bundesliga and, is in the last sort of 24 months, you'd have probably, punched me in the jaw, and quite rightly. But I do think that actually, I do think that a lot of clubs are actually looking at it and thinking, yeah, this is the model. And it's interesting. It's sort of similar to Chelsea, I think. A lot of people criticised the Chelsea model a couple of years ago and sort of were very negative and sort of, the £1 billion bottle jobs and those comments. And quietly, I think the perception has sort of shifted where people have actually realised, hang on, they've got a really good squad here. And now, I don't think we're challenging for the Premier League title this season. I'll go out and say I still think there's steps to go. But I do think there are now the things that are clicking together and the players that are coming in, and suddenly people are, opening their eyes and realising, they've got Willian Esteban arriving, and then people saw him at the Club World Cup, and they've got Andre Santos, and then suddenly people saw him at the Club World Cup, and there's João Pedro's been added to the mix, and people then saw him. And also, I think the big thing that Chelsea really dispelled is the long contracts issue, because even when we had players on long contracts, the likes of Breuer and Madueke and George Petrovic, we've managed to find ways to sell them and sell them for quite good money. And I think actually Sunderland, in a way, is sort of doing a bit of a sort of micro scale version of this, and that obviously brought in Joe Bellingham very, very cheaply, sold on for significant profit. I have no doubt that there are, I'm not going to go out and say it, I have no doubt there are other young players at Sunderland that in the next couple of years, if they do well in the Premier League, won't stay at Sunderland because other European sides will look at them and will snap them up. But at the same time, they will make significant money from it. And I think Sunderland have a very, very good scouting network. Like, one thing I do know that has been praised to me and said to me multiple times, that Sunderland's European scouting network, especially in the last couple of years, has been second to none, which is why they found the likes of Mayenda and Isidore and other players, in that category. And when you've got that backed, I think, by good, honest pros like Luke O'Nien, who, I think O'Nien probably knows in his heart that technically he's probably not a top Premier League player, but he's got the mentality and heart of a lion, and one of those players that literally has, been there and done that and seen it all by now. That adds a lot and gives you a lot of character. And I actually think having all of that is a really good blend for Sunderland. I think they've done it the right way, and that when you look at the players they've signed this summer, they've made improvements in positions where they need improvements, because ultimately the squad wasn't good enough to compete the Premier League. At the same time, there are still that core of players that got the promotion there and will feature regularly. And I think that's important from a mental point of view, because I think this is the big issue Burnley had a few years ago, where they got promoted and they got rid of all the players that, had been there and done the journey with them. And the same with, Leicester to an extent last season. A lot of the players that had been in the journey sort of disappeared out of it, and you lose that cultural nadir.
Looking at his stats from last season, if you look at the Premier League, he's only played 3 games, but then you look at the Conference League, which we touched on before, he was top scorer, got 6 goals. But what I found interesting, I don't really go into stats too much, but I suppose I've been doing it more recently. He had 6 goals, but that was from an XG, which I know can be a dirty word for people sometimes, but it was against an XG of 3.25. You touched on his pressing before. He wins possession in stats in this competition directly, which he's played more games of. He wins possession an awful lot in the final third, and 63% of his shots find the target. If I was to describe him based on stats and not watching him outside of occasional match of the day, which he didn't really feature much on in the live games I watched in the Conference League last year, he sounds like a hard-working, natural finisher. How close to that description is he?
Yeah, I think that's definitely what he can become. I think the natural finisher side of things, I think to an extent he does need to sort of calm down. Because I will say, of those 63% of those shots, some of them will be close range ones where I think actually he should have done better, or alternatively, you'll pick the wrong pass, or at times, like I said, you need to just calm it down and pick the finish a little bit better, because at times he'll try and, use the instep and use finesse when it literally just needs to be belting it. And other times he'll try and belt it and it just needs that sort of feather touch or something. But I do think that there's definitely something in there. And, at the end of the day, as I said before, you don't get to come through Barcelona's academy without being pretty good. You don't get to make your first team debut at Barcelona without being pretty good at that age. And he's done well for Spain's youth team. So I think there's definitely someone who, if he starts in and does well, I see no reason why, if he stays fit, he couldn't get towards double figures, in all honesty.
found it quite interesting that his deal has no option in it whatsoever. And you touched a little bit before about Como wanting to sign him, but like from a Sunderland perspective, if he goes on and has a brilliant season, a bit like Ahmad, you kind of never fall in love with a lone player. That it's not a great
Mhm.
situation for us. But if we look positively, which I'm trying to do permanently, sort of going forward because it's worked for me the past few months, I think the fact he doesn't have an option in the deal to make it permanent means that Chelsea see him as someone who can have a real big future. How highly is he rated at Chelsea, and do you personally expect him as someone that maybe wouldn't necessarily become a regular in the years to come, but someone who can contribute in a regular match day squad for Chelsea?
Yeah, I mean, I think just first I'll touch on the purchase option. Chelsea have been very, very keen not to include that in a lot of their loans because the sort of main thing I think is the cultural sort of aspect of it from Chelsea. So they don't really want to give people the chance at the end of loans. I think they're still stung by some of the historic loans they've done where they've included options to buy in them, and then actually the player's been worth a lot more at the end
Mm.
of it. Conversely, they've also had a situation where they've included options to buy the players not done so well on loan, and then they've returned and kind of been not damaged goods. That's the wrong word to use, but it's been harder to sort of make the sort of case for a pathway for them. I do think in Guiu's case that he will be a regular somewhere. I don't necessarily know if it will be at Chelsea if he fulfills the potential. Chelsea have so many strikers on the books and so many young quality strikers. Shin Mayuka out the academy is very, very good. Joao Pedro is not old. Liam Delap is not old. Nicholas Jackson, if he stays, is the veteran of the group at 24. So it's kind of you're not looking at a sort of very old unit in that regard. So consequently, I think that I think if he does well, and Sunderland stay up, I think there will be conversations to be had next year if he's happy there and he wants to stay there. At the end of the day, he's still a very, very young player, and it wouldn't surprise me if Chelsea did. We're happy to send him out on loan for another season. By next year, he will have actually attained sort of, I think, not homegrown status, but will have spent 2 years at the club, so subsequently will no longer qualify for the loan regulations, which again is a load of nonsense, but that's his own point entirely. Um, and so they'll sort of have that more flexibility sort of with it. But I do certainly, I think it's hard to predict with Chelsea players at this moment in time because I think, this time in January, I heard say about Dewsbury Hall, sort of everyone would have wanted him sold. And nowadays, you sort of gained a bit of a sort of cult appreciation as being the little workhorse that he is. And conversely, last summer, Nkunku was meant to be the saviour. And now all the Chelsea fans sort of would be quite happy to see him sort of move on. So I think it's hard to predict exactly what the longer term sort of future holds in that regard. But I do think that, Guiu's going to have a good career wherever he ends up going, wherever it ends up being. And I think Sunderland's a great next step for him.
Rob, always got to catch up, mate. Enjoyed that.
Pleasure as always, my friend. And again, I look forward to, I look forward to wishing you well in 36 games of the season.
I'll take 17th right now, mate. I've said that repeatedly. It's going to be a mantra. If we get any further than that, I'm delighted, mate. But I'm sure we'll speak later on in the season when we play you. And like I say, good luck apart from the 2 games to play against us this season, mate.
Pleasure. Have a good one, mate.